It's the 2022 World Cup. It's Croatia's players. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin, and today we'll be looking at Croatia's squad for the 2022 World Cup. Short version, please. Forward, and we're finished with the player-by-player run-through, and we'll move on to a discussion of the squad. And I suppose I should explain the weird shirt that I'm wearing. I was just looking for the closest thing that I could find to the white and red checkers of Croatia. So sorry for Croatian fans if this is a bit of a distant approximation of it, but the problem could always be solved by some beloved Croatian fans sending a shirt my way, because I have a bit of poverty of international shirts. I'm working on it. And hopefully in future podcasts I'll be a bit more accurate in wearing the shirt of the nation that I'm covering. Anyway, let's go back to some of the notes we had. So we introduced a few at the beginning. Some of them were team notes and some of them were more squad notes. So I'll dispense with the team notes quickly here. We talked about was 2018 just good fortune, and I won't repeat all that. But one thing we did note that it was kind of consistent with Yugoslavia, the former Yugoslavia's intermittent success. So Croatia more than Serbia kind of repeating their record of sometimes rising up to the semifinals and then sometimes not making the cup or just reaching the group stage. But one of the main questions we had with Croatia was, is it an aging squad? And having gone through the player-by-player section of the podcast, we can talk about it more in more concrete terms. So certainly their biggest names and the ones that stood out in the 2018 World Cup are aging, some of them having retired already. We'll review those players leaving the squad soon. However, that could be said of most nations, that their biggest names are their older players. And we saw in the player-by-player also that they have brought in a lot of youth. So the question really becomes whether that youth, those younger players, will reach the height of the veterans, especially in the 2018 World Cup. And in a sense, that leads us to the last question that came out of previous podcasts: is in this World Cup, is Croatia kind of battling with Belgium for first place, or perhaps comfortably finishing second above Morocco and Canada, or will they find themselves embroiled in a battle with Morocco and or Canada, and have to fight for second place and perhaps not even make second place? So most kind of superficial viewers are looking at Belgium and Croatia as the clear winners of the cup, with Morocco and Canada just happy to be there. But in our podcast, we thought it would be not so easy, and that Morocco and Canada could provide a challenge. We'll see. Let's talk about Croatia's club affiliations. And some of the players were with bigger clubs and have kind of, because of their aging, kind of moved either back to Croatia or down to smaller clubs. But we still have players with some pretty big clubs. So goalkeeper Ivo Grbić is with Atletico Madrid. And these are younger players, Josip Stanisic with Bayern Munich. Those are kind of the elite clubs. Kovacic is with Chelsea, and Modric still with Real Madrid, and Brozovic with Inter Milan. Tottenham Hotspur, Ivan Perisic has just moved there and moving from even bigger clubs still. And then we have a number of players at kind of secondary but good clubs like Wolfsburg, Wolfsburg, Southampton in England, Celtic, AEK Athens, Stuttgart, kind of at that level. So I would say about a third of their players are playing in Croatia, and Dinamo Zagreb, kind of the team that seemed to pop up again and again. And they have 4 players with Dinamo Zagreb, actually 5. And then a couple of others like Hajduk Split and Rijeka, among the bigger clubs in Croatia, Osijek as well. So pretty good club affiliation there. And let's move on to the next part, which is a bit of a number crunch on the team here. So all the way through these podcasts, I've been saying players called up since 2020, but it's actually I'm considering players called up since 2021, and how many players do they kind of have on the slate as options before them. Now, of course, some of those players have drifted off the team for quite a while, but it's a good measure. It kind of compares, how many options they have available to them. Well, as far as Croatia goes, it is 43 players, and that is quite a bit lower than most teams. The average is 49.6, so 49 or 50 players that have played for them over the past 2 years, roughly. And Croatia have kept it fairly small. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. In some cases, it might mean a lack of players that they have options for. I would say that's only true for Croatia in the forward position, a bit of a lack of options, but otherwise not really a problem. We have the next one, total players under more serious consideration. So these would be the players we've listed as definite, likely, or possible in the player-by-player podcast. And Croatia has 32. Actually, I'm finding most teams are pretty similar as far as this goes. And the average is 33, so not much to delve into there. And this other stat, which I'll try to improve in future contracts, future podcasts or future media cast. How many definite and likely are there? So for Croatia, there's 23. The average is 21. So they seem a bit more stable in the squad than some squads, kind of having decided on most of the players they would bring to the cup. And if we just think in terms of let's say they fill 23 positions, maybe 1 or 2 less if injuries play a role or if players are not called up in September, but we'll say roughly 23. And they have 32 players to fill those 3 spots because they bring 26 to the cup. So we'll see a couple of those possible players making the cup, and there's always room for players who suddenly come into good form or what have you. So things looking pretty much on path. So no big headaches to deal with for Croatia. And we're going to see they don't have a lot of injury problems either. Now, something we've made a lot of in the podcasts for the team is the average age of the team. So I've always found 25 to 27 is the average age, but I am finding teams in this World Cup a bit older. And here I'm looking at the definite, likely, and possible players. 26.8 is the average, and 27 is what Croatia's average age is. So it's actually just slightly above average. But let's break it down a bit. We see that their veterans, those players who came out of the 2018 World Cup are in their 30s now. But in fact, there's only 6 of them. Luka Modric is by far the oldest at 37. And then we have 3 players at 33. But they are big players, Lovren, Vida, and Perisic. And then 2 players at 31, Kramaric and Budimir. So actually, maybe not as old as we've been making out on the whole. It's just that the veteran players, and we're going to see some who have retired, did age out. On the other hand, they have brought quite a bit of youth into the team. So just one 20-year-old, but players between 22 and 24, they have 9. So basically, we'll say 10 players who are under 24. So we did say in the podcast that they were doing a fairly good job rejuvenating, and this kind of shows it. Again, the question is whether those newcomers are of the same quality as the outgoing players, but only time will tell. As far as average caps goes, it's 34.4. So again, some of those senior players have a tremendous amount of caps, and so on the whole, they have 5 more than the average, which is 29.5. So a fairly experienced team, and because they're small. In terms of the total number of players who have been starting, they probably play together quite well, familiar with each other, because they don't have a lot of players coming and going. Total goals is 130, which is kind of a meaningless statistic unless we put it in context, but those are the total goals of the definite, likely, and possible players. Overall, it's 130, which is actually lower than other teams. So we need to put it into context, and I've developed a new statistic, average goals per cap, and for Croatia that's 12.6%. The average is 13.7%. So among the teams I've done this for, which is, let me just see how many teams I've run this statistic for, 22 teams so far. They are one of the lowest, actually. We've talked about Australia struggling for goals. Australia is 12.5%. And basically any team around that percentage, we've mentioned kind of goals as a problem. And yeah, so goals are a problem, and that kind of fits with what we saw with them looking for a kind of a centre forward. Kramaric seems the main candidate, but he only has 2 goals in qualifying. But perhaps I've been a bit hasty there with Kramaric, because overall he has 19 goals in 73 games, which is a fairly respectable 26%. And the only player higher than him is actually Ivan Perisic with 28%, 32 goals in 115 games there. And sorry, I missed, surprisingly, Lovro Majer, the midfielder who has, 3 goals in 10 games, 30%. It is a higher percentage, but maybe not enough games to really make any big claims. There. So we'll kind of focus on players who have played, say, 15 or more games for this statistic. Luka Modric is at 15%, Nikola Vlasic 17, and Mario Pasalic, also around 15%. So one thing I can say is that they do kind of have scorers all over the field. However, even 26% for Kramaric as the player that they're considering as a centre forward is a little bit low, especially in context of their overall struggles to find a centre forward. So scoring a bit of a problem for Croatia here, and we'll see how that plays out in the cup. Let's look at some of the issues then. So in defense, we have Livakovic, Ivusic, or is it a rotation of the players there, of the goalkeepers? So recently, in recent games, it's been a rotation of Livakovic and Ivusic. But if we have to pick one, well, I'll let you know that when we do our starters. Maybe one of the bigger issues on the squad is are they going with the old or the new central defense? So we saw that Kaletakar, Lovren, and Vida were the kind of the rotation of starters in the first half of the period we're talking about. including the Euro Cup. And then Gvardiol came into the picture kind of halfway through World Cup qualifying. However, they underwent a really huge change in the friendlies and Nations League games towards the end of 2020, or towards the end of the period in March and June 2022, and ended up trying out all sorts of names, but emerging with Enrich and Sutalo as the main pairing at the end of Nations League. So it'll be, the question is, who will it be in the Cup? Basically the veterans. Coletta Carr is not so as old as Lovren and Vida, or will it be these new players coming in, Enrich and Sutalo? I'm anxious to kind of see what they do in friendlies in September. All right, for left defense, again, is it Sosa? Is it Barisic, or is it neither for left defense? Because in the last two games, we saw right defender Juranovic coming over into the position. So it makes me wonder whether the manager's not satisfied with Sosa or Barisic in the position. On as a right back, well, I said, will it be Versalico or Stanisic? They both returned to the right back position when Juranovic moved over. So it was steadily Juranovic until the last two games. And then these two players stepped in. Well, we know it won't be Versalico because, sorry, I'm not really sure how to pronounce that name, because even though he started the last game in June, he announced his retirement in August. So it wouldn't be him. It might be Stanisic playing on the right and Juranovic moving over to the left, Juranovic, I should say. Again, the friendlies in September may shed some light on that. In the midfield, there's not much to talk about. Steady selection of starters there. Real veterans in the midfield, Modric and Brozovic and Kalinic. Okay, I just have the feeling I'm saying his name wrong. Anyway, on the attack, we basically have a problem scoring goals, or a bit of a problem scoring goals. Not enough goals, really, for Croatia. So as a left attacker, is it going to be Perisic or Brekalo? Well, basically, Brekalo did play in the position a few times along with a couple of other players, but really 3 out of 4 times in June was replacing Perisic, who was injured. So I'm tempted to say that Perisic will come back into the position. In fact, I'm pretty sure of it. Ivanusic or Madger, or a rotation as right attacker. These two have been kind of rotating in the position. Will they nail it down to one? Or it seems like rotation of players is becoming more popular, so it might be both of them. And the situation is similar up front with Kramaric or Budimir. It could be both of them playing as centre forward, because they sometimes do go with two centre forwards. Kramaric seems to have the edge here. Again, it could be a rotation, but again, they don't fully seem satisfied with Kramaric as the centre forward, because in the Euro Cup and in the first few games they were trying out other players. And the sheer number of centre forwards is a bit lower than most teams bring to the Cup. Anyway, those are some of the issues. Let's move on to new players. So actually, more than most teams, Croatia's new players are making inroads into the squad. So we have 4 of them at the likely level, and then 6 of them at the possible level. So we went over these players in the player by player, so we'll really just mention them by name here. So goalkeeper Ivica Ivusic is not young, actually. He's 27 years old, but he joined Croatia in 2021. So we can consider him a new player, and we consider him a likely candidate, probably the third string keeper there. Josip Stanisic, also likely. He's 22 years old and is with Bayern Munich in Germany. So a kind of an exciting candidate as the right back there. Yeah, if the regular right back moves over to the left, that would open the door for him a little bit. Christian Jakic hasn't started actually that many games, but is 25 years old. Again, not that young, but new to the squad in 2021, and plays for Eintracht Frankfurt in Germany. And he's listed as a defensive midfielder, but he's also played as an attacking midfielder too. Lovro Majer, he's 24 years old and is playing, I believe, on the right side there. He actually returned after an absence too of 4 years. So he got his first cap in 2017, but really wasn't part of the squad until this recent period. Lovro Majer. And now we have players who are at the kind of possible level. So I would imagine maybe half of these will make it. Ivo Grbic is a goalkeeper, and he's playing for Atletico Madrid in Spain. He, again, is not young, 26 years old, but first cap with Croatia was in 2021. Nedeljko Labrovic, also a goalkeeper, and just came into the squad. He is young at 23 years old, doesn't have any caps for the squad, so maybe someone will see in the future, because I think Grbic would be ahead of him. Martin Ehrlich, and I'll do him together with Joseph Sutalo, so both central defenders who we saw starting the last 2 games as a pairing in June, which makes us wonder what's going on in central defense there. And Ehrlich is 24 years old and Sutalo 22 years old. And we'll see in the September games whether they show up again as the central defenders. Marin Pongrasic, I think he played in friendlies rather than in Nations League like the others too, but he has started 3 games for them, and he's 25 years old since 2020 with the team. And finally, you'll see the only defenders in this section, Borna Sosa. He's 24 years old and plays for Stuttgart in Germany, and he came in towards the end there, but he kind of no, he didn't. He came in after the Euro Cup and started, and actually at the end wasn't selected for the last 3 matches, so possibly a bit less likely than the others you see on the list here. And then, yeah, for midfielders and forwards, we didn't really have any new candidates, so we're going to move on to injuries. And so far, so good for Croatia. The only player who seems to be injured right now is Luka Susic, and he's a possible but unlikely candidate. He was out with a groin strain in early September. That seems to be something he would get over in time for the Cup. So I don't think it's a big concern, and no insult to him, but it wouldn't be a big loss for Croatia since he hasn't been playing that much for him. On the other hand, muscle problems in the groin region can be tricky. So even though he has actually played in early September, I don't know what I'm trying to say. Groin strain, maybe kind of an ongoing thing, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Okay, let's move on to the notable absences, and this is where we see players who have left the team, especially since the 2018 World Cup for Croatia. But there are a couple who have left more recently. So Lovre Kalinic, basically a backup keeper for them, but his going along with Subasic means that the goalkeepers that they have are kind of less experienced, especially the backup keepers that they have right now. So Lovre Kalinic, actually just 32 years old, so an outside chance of coming back into the picture, but he hasn't played since the 2021 Euro Cup. Sime Versa, I always have trouble with this name, Versalico, I'll say. A veteran on the team and actually played in June of 2022. And so one would have thought he was a candidate, but he actually announced his retirement in August. But he was kind of fading out and being replaced by the right defender there now, whose name is currently eluding me. So not a huge loss because he was kind of being replaced. Ante Rebic, a forward, never really made it onto the squad, so not a huge loss for them, but they do lack forwards, and he was a starter in the World Cup and in the Euro Cup, but he hasn't played since the Euro Cup, so one less forward available to them. The rest of the players I'm going to mention actually retired in 2018. But there are people who just follow these national teams from World Cup to World Cup, so may be surprised to see them gone. Also, this is some of the key players who helped them reach the final of the World Cup. So big names that are not available to them anymore. So Daniel Subasic, the goalkeeper who was a starter in the World Cup, he announced his retirement after the World Cup. Vedran Chorluka, the central defender, also announced his retirement after the World Cup, but it was actually kind of drifting off the team. He was more important in the 2014 World Cup, but for the 2018 World Cup, he was only a substitute, but nevertheless a big name for them. Ivan Strinic, a defender who was a starter in the 2018 World Cup. He retired after the World Cup because he was diagnosed with a heart condition, but he still, and he also retired from soccer. AC Milan let him go because of that heart condition. Ivan Rakitic, I think he continued playing a little while after the World Cup, but the World Cup was his last competition, and he kind of unexpectedly announced his retirement in September 2019, so a year after the World Cup, but not available to them now. And he was also a starter in the 2018 World Cup. And finally, we talked about him in the player-by-player, Mario Mandzukic. And a big kind of loss for them because they seem to be struggling to replace the forward. So he was their starting forward in the 2018 World Cup there. So a lot of veterans missing there. And just a note on Nikola Kalinic. He was selected for the World Cup 2018. And he came to the Cup and was on the bench, and apparently not happy about that because he refused to come in as a substitute. And he was sent home, but he was never a really big player for the club, actually, on the bench, really, for all of the tournaments he appeared in since 2008. And sometimes he wasn't even selected for tournaments. So I'm not sure why he was expecting to be a starter, but there we have it. Okay, so let us go back and go over the squad again, and we'll try to nominate starters. But as I said, more and more we're kind of seeing teams going with rather a rotation of starters. So I've decided to use yellow to denote when it's two players kind of rotating, or when there's kind of a strong possibility of them starting some but not all games. I'll just get rid of this highlight here so as not to confuse. So let's start with goalkeepers. Let's start with the manager. So Zlatko Dalic, with his success for the 2018 World Cup, He's been very successful as a manager, so I don't see them letting him go at this late date. Dominik Livakovic, I would say I would nominate him as the starting goalkeeper, although it might be a rotation with Ivica Ivusic, which they have been doing in recent games. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Ivusic starting a few games. The two possible candidates are Ivo Grbic and Nedeljko Labrovic, and so they'll probably be vying for the third string keeper position there. Among central defenders, we have had a rotation in the early to middle part of the cup. It was Duje Kaletakar, Dejan Lovren, and Domagoj Vida rotating, and then Josko Gvardiol came into that rotation a bit later on. But it all got blown up in the friendlies and Nations League games, with virtually none of those players showing up, just Kaletakar, and rather a bunch of new players emerging as Martin Ehrlich and Joseph Sutalo. So I really don't know what to do here. I don't know if these veterans are kind of off the squad. I don't think they are, or whether these new ones are going to replace them. So I got to say, I'm just leaving this as a confused blank. Left back, though, left back is also confusing because it looked like it would be Borna Sosa or Borna Barisic. I think actually Barisic will make it to the cup. But again, that kind of got blown up in the last two games when right back Josip Juranovic moved over and played the last two games. So I don't know whether that means they weren't satisfied with the left midfielder. So I got to leave that one blank too. But I can say that right back Josip Juranovic will be a starter, whether it's on the left or on the right. And we also have Josip Stanisic as a likely on the right back, whereas Sosa and Barisic are just possible candidates. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Josip Juranovic moving over to the left and Josip Stanisic playing on the right. But I'm going to leave it blank right now because I really can't hazard a guess. It's a bit easier in the midfield, though. Defensive midfielder Christian Jakic, I see him more as a substitute. He's a likely candidate, but a substitute. But I think the central midfielder Marcelo Brozovic will be a definitely make the squad, but will be a starter. And I see Mateo Kovacic, that was the name I was scrambling for earlier on. Mateo Kovacic and Luka Modric, I see them both starting. And so that central midfield of Brozovic, Kovacic and Modric, I don't see any challenges to them starting. Again, they may bring in a player for one game or two to give them rest or what have you. Mario Pasalic is an attacking midfielder. He's kind of been used all over the place, so I'm not confident enough to say he'll be a starter, though. I just want to kind of go back and look at how many games he's started actually since this period. He has started 10 of their 13 games, kind of moves around the field a little bit, which is why I guess I'm having a bit of trouble pinning him down. So I think he will be a starter. Yes, I'm going to be bold and say so. A left attacking midfielder, well, Perisic was injured at the end there in June, so Brekalo took over. I think they'll both reach the cup. We have Perisic as definite and Brekalo as likely. I think they'll both reach the cup, and I wouldn't even be surprised to see Brekalo starting a few games, but I think Perisic will be the starting left attacking midfielder. But he is getting old and not necessarily playing 90-minute games, so I think there will be room for Brekalo, perhaps even starting as the left attacking midfielder. On the right, though, it seems to be more of a rotation. So I think Vlasic I think Vlasic will be a starter, but not necessarily on the right. Vlasic started, well, he only started 6 of their games, so I think he'll definitely be there. But actually, I'm going to pip Ivan Usic and Major as kind of alternating starters in the cup. I think they'll both get a couple of starts, and I think Vlasic will too get a few starts, but I'm not confident enough that he'll be named as a starter. So I'm kind of hedging my bets a little bit here. Again, Kramaric seems to be the starting forward, but I don't really feel like they have great confidence in him. Nevertheless, even if he doesn't start as centre forward, I think they will start him perhaps as an attacking midfielder. So I'm going to say he's a definite starter. Ante Budimir, despite having rotated a bit with Kramaric as a centre forward, strikes me more as a substitute. So I'm not confident enough even to mark him in yellow. And yeah, you see a bit of a lack of forwards there. So I wonder even if in the cup, whether they'll be experimenting with some of the attacking midfielders they have playing that role of forward. It'll be interesting, especially with Croatia, to see what they bring out in the September games in late September and in some of the friendlies, which I'm sure they're going to play going into the cup. Anyway, that brings us to the end of the podcast here. I'll just show a little picture of Croatia and see how closely my shirt matches their shirt there. Red and white anyway. That's as close as I can get. Anyway, that brings us to the end of this MediaCast. So keep in mind, we'll be doing an update as new information comes out. That will probably be in early to mid-November when the teams publish their final squad list so that we can tell you how it all turned out. Meanwhile, keep an eye on us at Soccerphiles Canada. That's Soccerphiles with a PH in the middle and an S at the end, and on our website at soccerphiles.captivate.fm. And check the show notes. I've been improving the show notes to give more information. So there are links to our website and some good information there for you. Thanks so much for listening, and we will see you when we cover our next team. Bye-bye. Player-by-player section of the podcast. So we're going to move on to a discussion of the squad, and we'll begin by reviewing some of the notes from the beginning of the podcast. So perhaps a bit of repetition here, but I partly do it for those joining us in the short podcast at this point. So some of the notes from the beginning, kind of takeaways from our team podcast, were that the dynasty period for Spain is over. So a great period from 2008 to 2012, finished with a sudden finish with the group stage exit from the 2014 World Cup. And Spain have been wondering about how things go forward from there. So how have they done going forward? Is it a return to a fairly ambivalent history in World Cup and Euro Cup, where the quarterfinals seemed to be their ceiling prior to 2008? They did that regularly enough, but didn't often get past the quarterfinals. So would they be able to rebuild to kind of remain one of the top teams? It's still really open to debate, because they were kind of poor after 2014, but then in the 2020 Euro Cup they reached the semi-finals. So again, maybe one of the top teams in Europe will say a semi-final finish, making them one of the top teams, but otherwise their results have fallen off quite a bit since their dynasty period. Finally, is the absence of Real Madrid players in the 2020 Euro Cup significant? Well, certainly the fact that there were no Real Madrid players angered fans of that team. So that actually leads us nicely into the next section where we look at club affiliations. And I'd say about 2/3 of the players play in Spain. And we have 6 players for Barcelona. And we're talking about the players in our definite, likely, and possible categories here. 6 of them with Barcelona and only 2 of them with Real Madrid. So, perhaps there is a bit of an issue there. I got to admit that I'm not intimate enough with Spain to really comment on this. I don't really follow the kind of day-to-day dramas of the team, but more of a broad overview. So you'd probably have to find another podcast to get into the kind of day-to-day gossip and talk about the team. Anyway, we do have 3 players for Atletico Madrid, and then several players, a couple of players for Villarreal and Valencia. So the main teams in Spain, they're all being represented, and Atletico Bilbao, a bit of a smaller team. Inigo Martinez coming from there. Otherwise, about 1/3 of the players kind of play outside of Spain, with actually most of them being in Europe. In England here, a couple with Manchester City, and a couple with Paris Saint-Germain, and otherwise smaller teams. Leipzig is kind of moving up in Germany, but they're not a top team yet, I would say. In England, we have Chelsea, but we also have a couple of smaller clubs like Leeds United, Brentford, and Brighton being represented. So pretty strong club affiliations, and still about 2/3 of the team coming from teams in Spain. Let's look at a couple of statistics that I've been putting together in comparison with the other national teams in the tournament. And for average, for total players under consideration, we have 50 for Spain, with the average being 50.3. So kind of bang on form there. Not too many, not too little. They will have to make a few decisions and cuts along the way, but nothing to really comment on there. For a number of candidates under more serious consideration, that would be definite, likely, and possible candidates, 32. And that's actually a little bit lower. So Spain has kind of stuck with the same players a little bit more than other teams. But again, not a lot to talk about there. It's kind of in range. And then candidates that are definite or likely, so we'd almost be surprised to not see them make the cut, is 23. So if we have to reduce the squad to 26 players, that means they have to basically add 3 players, and that will be from the 32 players probably. So a couple of decisions to make. We also have some injured players that are concerned, so that might change it up a little bit. In terms of average age, Spain's is 26.9. That's within the 25 to 27 range that I've been talking about, but actually is a bit towards the upper end of that range. So we can consider Spain kind of a slightly older team than average, but not really anything of concern. They do have Marcos Llorente, 37 years old, as their oldest player, and they have 9 players who are 30 or older. And at the bottom of the scale, that compares with 6 players who are 22 or younger. And in fact, they have 3 players who are younger than 22. And Pablo Sarabia, a definite candidate, is one of them. So, yeah, again, not really anything to comment on there because it's basically in range. Average number of caps is 27.4. So the average is 27.5. So really nothing to draw from that statistic. Total number of goals is a bit surprising for me, 79. A bit low, to be honest. I thought Spain was kind of a higher scoring team. So let's take a look at that. Total goals per player on average is 2.8. And that is actually lower than the 3.6 average. So again, I'm taken a bit by surprise here by having thought that Spain was a higher scoring team than they seem to be. But let's take a look at the scorers in a bit more detail. And we saw during the play-by-play podcast, actually, that Alvaro Morata has a very good scoring ratio. That's 47%. And Ferran Torres is 43%. So both of those big scorers. Pablo Sarabia with 9 goals in 24 games is at 37%. However, that's a bit of a big drop-off after that. Carlos Sora is next with 27%, and everyone else is below 20%, including Dani Olmo and any of the other forwards under consideration. So actually, Jeremy Pino, 1 goal in 6 games, doesn't really count. We need a bit more data to really draw a conclusion there. So again, just in general, a bit less scoring than I thought they would be, but not really an issue of great concern. Let's move to some of the issues for Spain. And one issue in defence is inexperienced backup keepers. So the backup keepers seem to be Sanchez and Rea, and each of them have 1 cap. So I wonder if this could be a reason to actually take David De Gea, since Unai Simon himself only has 27 caps. So he's a bit inexperienced himself, and maybe David De Gea could bring some experience to the bench. We also have Aymeric Laporte's health and fitness. He is due back, I think, at the end of September. So that's kind of an important consideration for Spain to have him back in defence. We do have kind of a rotation of defenders, central defenders there, which we'll talk about when we try to pin down the starters. Alba or Alonso for left back. Again, I'm beginning to suspect that Spain is rotating positions on purpose, kind of having 2 players ready. So it seems for a lot of positions they have 2 players, although it's a bit surprising for goalkeepers that they haven't done the same thing. On the right side, we have the same situation as Piliqueta and Carvajal seemingly sharing the position, but are they going to land on a consistent starter, or is the philosophy more to have 2 starters kind of rotating in and out? Same situation in central midfield. Busquets and Rodri. Well, actually, they have 2 central midfield positions available, so that is perhaps not down to 1 player. And we saw, especially on the left side of midfield, it's a bit undecided. The formation is very predictable. We saw they have a 4-3-3 all the time. So perhaps Spain adds unpredictability by using different players in positions. And it seems they, for the right and left midfielders, both in the middle of the field and the left and right forwards rotate players in quite a lot. So it would be difficult to kind of know who's going to be starting. On attack, the issue, Sarabia or Olmo seem to be vying for the left forward position, but again, it could be more of a rotation. But the 2 positions that they do have fairly consistent starters for is goalkeeper and centre forward. Otherwise, it's going to be hard to pin down the starters or predict the starters when we get to that section. But before we get to that section, let's take a look at some of their new, injured, and absent players. So I'm going to kind of go in order of importance, and what I mean by importance is their likelihood to reach the squad. So definite candidates, Carlos Sola, a central midfielder, is new to the squad and plays for Paris Saint-Germain. Gavi, also a central midfielder playing for Barcelona, new to the squad also. Soler is actually 25 years old, but got his first cap in 2021, whereas Gavi is 18 years old. So both of those new. Goalkeeper David Rea, we'll have him as a likely candidate unless I'm correct in perhaps guessing that De Gea might be brought in for experience. But David Rea plays for Brentford in England. He's 27 years old, so not a young player, but he is new to the squad, getting his first cap in 2022. Inigo Martinez, a central defender who we also consider likely. He's actually 31 years old, but has never made a tournament. I just put him on here because of that. He does have 19 caps since 2013, but in terms of being a serious candidate for the team, he's new. Okay, I probably shouldn't have put him on the list. I'll admit it. Marcos Alonso is also really kind of new to the Spanish squad. Has been on the team since 2018, but hasn't been involved in a tournament. But now that he seems to be getting some starts and is a likely candidate to reach the cup, we can kind of consider him a new consideration. And by the way, for those watching on YouTube, if I have the player's name in light grey, excuse me, sorry, I had to cough there. If I have the player's name in light grey, it means they've never been in a tournament. If it's in black, it means they have been in a tournament. Anyway, Marcos Alonso, a likely candidate who would be new to the tournament experience. Sergio Reguilon, we all have him as possible. So if it's a possible candidate, I'll really just go through the names here. Hugo Guillamon, also a possible candidate. Jeremy Pino, who we're going to talk about in injuries right away here. And Raul de Thomas, although it looks almost certain that he won't be on the squad, even though we had him as a possible candidate. But perhaps look for him on the Spanish team after the World Cup. In terms of injuries, the most concerning one is Aymeric Laporte, but he had knee surgery over the summer and is due back, I believe it's at the end of September. Even if it's a little after that, that seems to give him enough time to recover for the Cup. So they will definitely be hoping so, as he seems to be a starting central defender if he's fit. Sergio Reguilon was injured for the last 4 games. He has a groin muscle injury since May, and even now has an unknown return date. So Sergio Reguilon really never made it into the squad anyway, but if he had any chance of making it into the squad, this injury may undermine that. Sergi Roberto, he's out with a muscle injury problem in mid-September, and I don't think we have a return date for him. But again, he's just a possible candidate, even without the injury. We have Mikel Oyarzabal. This actually is he's more of a starter than the ones we just mentioned. He's out with a cruciate ligament injury since March. However, he is expected back in mid-October. So those September friendlies where we hope to get a bit of an update on the squad will come too soon. And we'll have to see if they have any pre-tournament friendlies that'll give us an indication of whether he's coming back. Jeremy Pino is a right winger, and he's out with an ankle injury in June. But in my most recent look at the injury list, he wasn't on it. So I think he may already be back in action, Jeremy Pino. We also have Pedri. He was out with a hamstring injury in June, but seems to be over it now. Again, he wasn't on the injury list when I last checked it. However, it did leave him out for the last 4 games there in June. there. And wow, a long injury list here. We also have Danny Olmo out with a knee injury from early September. However, he is expected to come back in mid-October. So a long injury list, and we're not done yet. The last one is not an injury, but it's Thomas. Raul de Thomas. So we talked about this in the player-by-player, and it seems a bit of a complicated story. But the word is he's just simply won't be selected. He was listed as ineligible, but I don't think it's that. I think it's that he, well, again, I don't want to get into the story, but something to do with a club transfer, and basically he can't play for his club until January, so he would lack the fitness to make the tournament. Anyway, despite that large number of injuries, it seems like most of them will be available, especially the big players there, Laporte, Pedro, Olmo, and Oyarzabal. All of them probably due back before the tournament. Okay, let's take a look at some notable absences. Well, I'm kind of cheating here. David De Gea is actually a possible but unlikely, so he's kind of drifted off the Spanish team in recent times. When I did talk about him perhaps coming back because of his experience, so not really off the team. Sergio Ramos, the defender. I covered him in the player-by-player podcast, but a true veteran for the team. But he is 36 years old now, and he missed the Euro Cup, though that was due to injury, but seems to be off the team now since he hasn't played since before the Euro Cup. Diego Costa. Now we're talking about players really missing from the World Cup 2018, because there are some listeners who kind of follow these national teams from World Cup to World Cup. So even though he and the following players weren't selected for Euro 2020, I'm just pointing them out from the World Cup 2018. So Da Costa not making Euro 2020 either, but he was a starter in the World Cup. Isco is also gone, still playing club soccer, but last appeared for the national team in June 2019. So he was, again, a starter in the World Cup, but didn't make the Euro 2020. Andre Iniesta, a starter in the World Cup, but he had retired by the time the Euro 2020 came around, and one of the key players of that dynasty generation there. And David Silva, also a starter in the World Cup, but had announced his retirement before the Euro 2020. So these are some big names, and we're not done yet. Yes, we are. Okay, that's the end of the notable absent list. So we have one more thing to do, and that is to go through and predict the starters for the Spanish team. And I'm going to actually use yellow, the color yellow, to indicate a kind of a rotation here. So Luis Enrique is the manager and will almost definitely remain manager, although they did fire a manager shortly before a cup in recent times, but I doubt that'll happen here. For goalkeeper, we can be quite certain that Unai Simon is the starter. I'll just name the definite and likely candidates. So we have Unai Simon as definite, Robert Sanchez as definite, and David Rea as likely. But Unai Simon definitely the starter there, as he has started almost all of their games. In defense, it is really a lot of players to deal with. So as a definite candidate, we have Pau Torres, and as likely candidates, we have Eric Garcia, Emerick Laporte, and Inigo Martinez. And there is quite a bit of rotation there, but I'm going to put Emerick Laporte as a definite, because I think if he's healthy, he will be a starter. And this could be controversial, but I'm going to put Pau Torres. Of course, we need two two central defenders to start, but I'm going to put Tau Torres, Eric Garcia, and Inigo Martinez as rotating, although I do think Torres and Garcia are probably the more likely candidates there. For left back, we have a bit of a rotation here. So in the past, it would have been definitely Jordan Alba, but it's been fairly even in recent times. So I'm going to put Jordi Alba and Marcos Alonso as rotating there. Jordi Alba having played in tournaments before, but Marcos Alonso not. For right back, we have the same situation. Cesar Azpilicueta, the definite candidate, and Danny Carvajal, the likely candidate. Both seem to rotate. And to be honest, I've come to believe that Spain is rotating these positions on purpose. So rather than a kind of a firm starter with a backup, they're giving experience to two players by alternating them in games so that they have both available to start. Central midfielders, we have Sergi Busquets, this is defensive midfielders, Sergi Busquets and Rodri as definite candidates, and a 4-3-3, only one of them can start. So I think I'm gonna guess that it's a rotation of those two players in their 4-3-3 formation. Of course, they can always change formation and go with two central midfielders, but they've used a 4-3-3 all the way now, so I'm kind of working on that basis. I'm going to name the central midfielders here, but actually we see that the actual central midfielders in that 4-3-3 formation are Busquets and Rodri. So the central midfielders will play right or left midfield. Actually gets complicated because some of the wingers and attacking midfielders come back into this position, but we'll try to handle it as best we can. So as definite candidates for players coded as central midfielders, we have Carlos Soler and Gavi, and a likely candidate for Marcos Llorente. But we'll actually talk about the position of left midfielder first. And in that position, it's a real mix, actually, of Soler. So I'm just going to highlight these in yellow as alternate players that may alternate as starters. So Soler and Gavi, and then attacking midfielder Koke coming back to play in this role of left midfielder, and Pedri, who actually played the role in the Euro Cup. So again, I'm beginning to feel that Spain are predictable in their formation, but not predictable in who goes into that formation, and perhaps do that to be unpredictable. So I think any one of those could start, and the four, or some of the four, will actually share the role, different ones starting different games. All four of those could also be on the right midfield, but I'm going to add Marcos Llorente there as someone who might start a game as a right midfielder. But as I say, I think all five of those players will could well get starts. Quite complicated, and no less complicated in the left forward role. So we'll actually, for Spain, because of the 4-3-3, we put left wingers and right wingers into the forward category, because they generally will play left forward or right forward. And for left wingers, also kind of a rotation is the best guess we can make. And the three players there are attacking midfielders Pablo Sarabia, and he may start anywhere, left, right, or even as a forward. Same with Dani Olmo, generally on the left, but could start in any of those three forward positions. And if he's fit, Mikel Oyarzabal. So, I can't really pin it down to a starter. However, I'm going to be bold on the right side, on the right wing, and say Terran Flores is a starter there. Again, he may start in a different position in that forward line, but he's been fairly steady as the starting right winger. And same for the forward. Alvaro Morata, I'm going to put as the default starter. But we also have Olmo and Sarabia sometimes stepping into that position. So a lot of fluidity in the front line there. So I'll just go through those players again because it was quite confusing. So central midfielders, Carlos Soler, Gavi as definite to make the squad. Marcos Llorente is likely to make the squad. And all three of those as potential starters, probably in a rotation. For left wingers, we have Mikel Oyarzabal as possible, but that's largely because he was a bit of an injury doubt. But I think if he's back, he would be a likely candidate. And for right wingers, we have a definite Ferran Torres and a possible Jeremy Pino, who may show up, but more likely a substitute if he's on the squad. But we put Ferran Torres down as a definite starter on the right wing, or at least in the forward line. For attacking midfielders, we have definite candidates in Koke and Sarabia, and a likely candidate in Pedre. And Koke and Pedre are more in the middle of the midfield, and I think they'll be rotating starters. And Pablo Sarabia, actually, I'm going to put him as a definite to start somewhere. Although where is kind of up to question because he plays any of the positions on the front line. And for forwards, we have Alvaro Morata as a definite and Dani Olmo as a likely, but Dani Olmo more often plays as the left forward, but does play any of those three positions. And so I think he'll be a rotating starter. Whew, that brings us to the end of the predictions, and we will see if we can shed more light on this, but I'm not sure there is more light to be shed if Spain purposely kind of rotates positions, rotates starters, so as to remain a bit unpredictable. So keep in mind that we'll be doing an update as new information comes out. That will probably be in early to mid-November when the rosters are published, and we're going to do the podcast. Once the final rosters are published, we can tell you who made the squad and also give any updates that are relevant, especially on injuries for Spain. Meanwhile, keep an eye on us at Soccerphiles Canada. That's Soccerphiles with a PH in the middle and an S at the end, and our website at soccerphiles.captivate.fm, and check the show notes. We've been improving the show notes for links to our websites and previous podcast series. We've now made playlists for each series on YouTube. So thank you for listening, and I hope you join us for the next MediaCast. Bye bye.